well documented, possibly familiar to many of you who lived in Yellow Springs for any length of time. The company was started in 1926 by two Antioch students, Ernest Morgan and Walter Cahill. And the back table, clear back there, got some great photographs of the early building when they first started. Working at the Antioch Press, they sought to create a product to sell using scrap paper that was left over from other jobs. In 1931, the company had been successful enough to move to 220 Xenia Avenue. That's the brick building, is it not? Yeah. Yes. Believe it is. If you wanted to see something back in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, was watch a semi-truck come up Xenia Avenue and back into the loading dock. The loading dock is still there between Nippers Corner and the building, the brick building. All traffic would come to a stop. That building is currently housing several King's Yard shops. There have been many articles written detailing the early history of Ernest's endeavors, which included his creating a sales album, the later example of which is on the first table, and hitchhiking around the Midwest seeking dealers to sell the products. His philosophy of business, political and societal beliefs carried over onto his business practices and employee policies. Bookmarks were added to the line in 1930, originally packaged for Sunday school bookmarks and religious shield-style plastic ones. And there are some of those. Where are those, Gene? Over here on the bookmark table, okay? Famous artists were enlisted for designs, a licensing agreement for bookmarks with Walt Disney Company, and the addition of first full-time sales representatives were highlights during the next 10 years. When Lee Morgan took over the helm of the business in 1970, he updated the technology with the purchase of an offset press and constructed a larger building at 888 Dayton Street. That was a four-color Heidelberg offset press. That was a monster and came in pieces from Germany, and the gentleman who came with the press helped put it together and get it into service. See where I left off. The sales exceeding $1 million in 1975 due to the addition of calendars, tasseled bookmarks, diaries, and various promotional items. The name of the company was officially changed to Antioch Publishing Company in 1981. This was following the successful licensing and sales of Jim Davis Garfield comic strip designs, first on tasseled bookmarks, then later on many other products. And it was in the mid-year 1980 that Gene Rudiger joined the creative department, joining Tom Till, Joan Corbett, and Linda Nelson, developing ideas and creating art for calendars, bookplates, and more in-house. So I'll turn it over to Gene, and she can talk about taking it from there. One thing I wanted to point out is the website for the Historical Society is at yshistory.org. And Becky Eshelman, bless her heart, had put a lot of information in there, pictures and documentation about the Historical Society and about the village. So without further ado, thank you.
Becky said he helped put that press together too. I'm not a public speaker. I'm going to be reading some because I don't remember what I'm supposed to say. But when I was hired in 1980, 3 artists that he mentioned. Joan was working on Sesame Street designs, which I searched and searched to find some art for, and I couldn't. I wanted to show you that. Tom Till was working on a calendar. It had the little troll in it. At the time, he did nature ones, and he did troll ones. Linda was probably some cute bookmark designs. She's an excellent artist who did really cute book bearers and things. She later went on to check with Gibson. When I was interviewed by Mike Gardner, who was vice president, time, he probably was vice president, head of marketing at least. It became pretty clear that I was being hired because I could work quickly. He would point out the samples that I brought, because I'd gone to stores and seen, oh, this is what they do. My husband Lance was originally going to apply for the job, and when he got to the interview, he's like, I brought my wife because this really makes more sense. So I went in and talked to Ann Harris, who was in charge at the time. But then, for the second interview, talking to Mike Gardner, I would show the samples, and he'd go, how long did this take? How long did that take? And if I said something short, I got the job, so, which I did work pretty quickly, but it's not always the best way to hire somebody to do art, but it worked out for me. So Ann Harris was the current creative director. Her assistant, Joe Edson, they were both in a construction type trailer that they put right outside the building because they were running out of space. And they put me in there too, which was fine, except Joe would answer a lot of the phone calls. And if it was raining, you couldn't hear anything on that metal trailer. So that was funny. One of my first memories there, when I was in the trailer, I looked out, it was by the parking lot, I saw Mike. He's going to his car and he's carrying this display. It's got all the new Garfield bookmarks. He was very excited. It was our first major license. We had gotten at that point a pretty large network of in-house and independent sales reps. And they would go and place designs in bookstores mainly, sometimes gift shops, hospital gift shops. Each person who was hired had to go for a day with one of the reps, and usually it would be Vicki Morgan, because she was local. When I went with her, we went to a Catholic church in Columbus where they had the Christian bookmarks on display. They wanted you to have a better idea of what went on in the company. Every year we also had to create new catalogs. We have a few of those, a few places here. You can see how they started out by just actually pasting bookplates into a notebook. Later we worked on catalogs. We helped do the trade shows in the creative department. Very often the trade show, either in New York or Chicago, would be introducing the new product, and the reps would be working in the booth, and our sales department. Thank you, sales department rep back there. And but then the products wouldn't be ready yet, so we'd have to make a lot of mock-ups to send. And we would go also to the shows to help them set up, but also to walk around the show to get more ideas of trends, things what other people were doing. The show in Chicago was the Booksellers, ABA. The show in New York was usually the stationery show at the Javits Center. There were obviously many more presses being added as we went along, more equipment, more things that we were producing, moving people around. Rita can maybe answer more questions about the production areas, because she moved through a lot of those areas in her many years there. So this was all before the brand new building. So once they added a little bit of space to the older building, so I didn't have to be in the trailer anymore, we were all together. We hired a number of different artists over the years. They kind of came and went, and I can't even remember all their names. Usually people stayed for a while. It was a pretty good job to be able to sit there and actually do art. There's not, even though it's not exactly maybe what you do on your own. It was good, and it was a good job for me because I lived in Yellow Springs and I could walk back and forth. My kids went to school. I could go to the sports at the end of the day. They could bring them over when they broke their legs on the sledding hill. Thank you, Rita, for coming to the rescue. They would let people be on the squad even though they were working, so that they could leave right away, right, Rita? So the creative marketing and the sales departments were responsible for developing the new product lines, special sales for select customers. There were sales reps who worked with Scholastic Scholastic book fairs. I went to Florida one time to meet with them there. They especially had a lot of the books that a lot of you have seen around where they had stickers in them, and they would buy lots of those for their book fairs. Working with Target was pretty hard to work with. Later on, they tried to work with Target. They're very specific. They worked a lot with the bookstores directly. And some of the bookstores, like Barnes & Noble, would be very specific. They would want special things for them. They would be, details on how they wanted them done. So through that, we would, that's the beginning, figuring out what you're going to do. I'm not going to run down the whole list of the process. I did do one list. If somebody's super interested and not that familiar with how art's created, how it becomes something. There's kind of a timeline here, very simplified. I probably left out some departments even of where it starts and where it ends up, people filling orders. There's a pretty nice photo, I think it's on the last table too, overlooking the plant at the time where you can see somebody working on something. The photo was in one of the catalogs, so it gave you a better idea of the part of the shop floor. And we also took over that back warehouse, where if you go the existing 888 Dayton Street building, if you take that drive on back and there's a warehouse in the back, well, there was a room as you went into where the trucks would back in with a stairway, and if you went up the stairway, there was a room up there, and that was the new creative department. So we did have space. That was a little unusual location, but it worked out. And later, I think, it was when the new building was added, which was 2000? 2000, the one that you see on the end, which they're always trying to fill. We got to move over there, and they hired somebody to decorate that whole place. If you've ever been in it, it's pretty interesting, the furniture and the coloring and everything, because they hired somebody to figure that all out. They put in rocking chairs. At that point, Lee wanted to go with the open concept idea for cubicles. So nobody, not even him, had an office that was completely closed off, which is good and bad. Okay, so we went there. Yeah, on the last table, I just kind of threw in a few of the newest samples that I had around. I left in 2004. I think it was maybe 3 more years before they completely vacated the business. I'm not sure. I didn't pay a lot of attention after that. And there is a catalog from like a year after I left. And if you flip through that, it's amazing the number of things that they started adding. A few years before that, when they wanted to do the wired journals, which we couldn't produce in Yellow Springs, or in St. Cloud, where Webway was, or Creative Memories was, they started getting them made in China. And we had a rep who went to different factories and worked with people in China and brought samples, and she would be our go-to person. None of us, I'm pretty sure, ever went to China for any reason, but she would come and go. And we would decide, yes, we'll do this, we won't do this. The one difficulty was making sure that our factories were not using children to make these things. But she would get that checked out. And she would tell us about how a lot of the people who worked in the factories, they would work there like for months at a time, and then whatever money they made, they went back to where they came from, their village or whatever, where their family was, and support them. But anyway, there's a lot of products there that it's kind of obvious which ones were probably from China, and there were even more that they added after I left. And they really expanded into some pretty interesting products, which some of them probably didn't go over that big, and some of them might have. So before I conclude, I did want to apologize. I don't think we have any of the other artists here today, but there were a lot of different artists, and I really wanted to represent more different people here. Our archives, the historical archives, everything's well put away, but not organized. It's really hard to find what you're looking for. It really needs to be in a better location. We've talked about it a lot on the board meetings, trying to find some place, if anybody has any idea, where would be a great place in the village where we could, without paying or not paying very much, to be able to archive this material. It's at Antioch College down in the basement. Not a great place. You don't want to spend too much time there. And I would definitely work on organizing things better if we can find a good move. So that's why, because it's hard to find things, it's kind of heavy on things that I actually worked on, even some that my husband worked on, because I had a lot of that art myself for some reason at my house. Not sure why. And definitely a lot of samples, because artists always got samples of what they worked on, licensors got samples. If you think we need more room for walking around and looking closer at these things, we can move a lot of chairs. And if you want a chair left and sit down, that's fine too. There's several people here who might help me answering questions. Rita Hamilton for sure. Sue Green's back there from our sales. Anybody else from publishing?
I could speak to the early years because my father was.
All right. And Linda is here.
Production.
Yeah. Or, just look around and I'll be here, answer questions. Enjoy. Any questions right now? Of course. Yes.
So, did more of the ideas come from the sales end of things, saying we need this, we need that, or were you brainstorming some new ideas? How did that?
I would say originally, before we added too many other products, for sure we would have to sit there and come up with bookmark ideas, designs, whatever. Show our creative director at the time,
Louder.
yeah, that's good, that's
Louder,
good.
please.
Yeah, it would be mostly, we would be coming up with the designs, the artists. Once we got more into licensing, it became more obvious. You would watch the movie, you would read the book, you would get the materials, and from that you could usually figure out designs. Sometimes we had to do the art for the licensing. Like I said, Joan was doing Sesame Street. There is an example of the advent calendar that she did. She had done the art for that. I think she did the Berenstain Bears. Somebody worked on a Ghostbuster book because I found a couple pages of art. Tom maybe, not Tom Till, but the later Tom. Yeah, Tom Canarney. So that became, yeah, it varied. Sometimes sales would come, but mainly if it was a special sale. They specifically knew what they wanted. Lucas. Star Wars is through Lucas. Yeah, it's in the article mentioned. I actually went there one time, which was very interesting because you go back through this. They have their own fire department because they're back in the woods there near San Francisco, and they had things over their fireplace that were from like the what you call it movie, The Whip and the Hat. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, there you go.
One of you probably don't know, whatever happened to Walter Cahill? Would you know when he left, or?
It is in that information. I
Okay.
remember it was pretty early. Wasn't he the one who left really early? And
He became the city manager.
yes, and sold the business all to Ernest around. Yeah, it
When I
was real
very
early
young, there
on.
used to be occasional note in the Yellow Springs News about what he was up to, but I can't remember.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You know, can you say anything at all about how they got involved with creative members?
I can a little bit. I'm kind of feeling like it's a whole other story, but the origins were, yes, Webway Holes Company was wanting to sell. They were bankrupt, going out of business, whatever, and they made the albums. And they had that very specific way of making albums, putting them together. If you've ever used any albums, you know what it is. And they decided that would add on. We were just selling kind of similar social book kind of things, but nothing like that. So they got the whole way. The one person who was using their albums and doing scrapbooking on her own got in touch with Vicki, and they started Creative Memories.
Cheryl Lytle.
Cheryl Lytle.
She's still in this
Yep.
area.
Yep. Oh, good. Yeah, I
She
run
moved-
into her.
Well, she
from
moves
her.
back and forth. She's
Uh-huh.
she's maybe a few months here in Beaver Creek, and then she's in Minnesota.
Yep. Cheryl. Yep. Yes.
When did they transition from the offset printer to digital?
Oh.
And what impact did that have?
Is one of my sentences I skipped. Yeah, and I don't have the exact date, but it did fall from us to take then everything that was before digital and get them all into digital files, which took like over a year. You had to find the art, get it separated digitally instead of just film, because before we would, send things out to color separators and they bring back film and we check the proofs, etc. But once we went digital, every file that was current, we had to dig out and find what was needed to recreate it on the computer, send it to our pre-press department, who then made digital plates. They didn't strip the film in anymore like they did when we started. And there's a pretty good history with the production art department as well. I don't remember if you started before the computers or when the computers came. I think for a while the production art was doing the art boards.
The art board.
You were doing the art boards the old way, and then you got the computers first.
We got Apple.
Right. And they started then making digital, and we didn't have to buy the type outside anymore, etc. Now the actual year. I don't remember exactly what year they would have gotten the digital press.
Just before I retired, now I'm retired in 2010. So
Let's say maybe 1999, 2000.
I didn't really get too familiar with it before I retired.
Right. So then the plates, would go on, they'd be digitally made and go on the press.
Jean,
Yes.
can you repeat people's questions? We can't hear
Oh.
back here. Sound like
Sorry, yeah, that was when we moved to being digital from the previous, which, did give us a lot of work that we had to do, that I had to coordinate to get everything that way.
I think it was in the late 90s. that it
Yeah, the
changed
very
over.
late 90s,
Yeah.
I would say that was, right.
Could I add some information about the earlier history? To speak to?
Sure, would you all be interested in her speaking to some earlier history? Which
Sure.
I
Okay.
skipped because I wasn't there.
Well, my father, I'm Brenda Hubbard, and my father, Jack Hubbard, his picture's over there. He was one of the artists in the late 40s, and he was just kind of a general worker, and he also designed book plates, and he built little display stands to show the book plates off. But the thing I think is interesting about his story is that he was originally from Kansas, and he was a conscientious objector during the Second World War. And the reason my family to Yellow Springs was because after the war, the conscientious objectors had a very difficult time finding work. And they were thought about very poorly and discriminated against. And my father went to a Quaker organization in Philadelphia, and they recommended that he apply at the Bookplate Company. And that's what brought my family to Yellow Springs. So it's kind of another one of those great stories of the village being a sanctuary for people who, for some reason or another, didn't fit in elsewhere. So I thought that was worth sharing.
Yeah, there's also, I ran across a lot of articles, different places. Wikipedia's one, which might not be totally accurate, but there's a lot there on the I put the booklet, you can still get bookplates from Bookplate Inc., Karen Gardner. And she also has a good back history if you go to her website without, you don't have to buy bookplates necessarily, but it's interesting because she has the history as well. And there's an article, but you don't necessarily read the whole thing. There's one over there.
Right back there.
Yeah.
This isn't a question, but just a comment. I used to work for McHoward County Board of Developmental Disabilities at the Adult Work Center, and we used to, the
Tassel.
clients used to put the tassels on, and we would collect them and band them and
Yep.
package them back up for,
Yep.
to
I remember
send
that.
back. And then one day, and I have no idea when this was, so don't ask. But we were going to take a tour of the Antioch Bookplate when we were going to come out and tour. And big surprise to me was a friend of my family, Brett Harper, the son of Charlie Harper, was working there.
He was the creative director.
The
right.
creative director, and I had no idea he was working there when I was going to do a tour, so it was a big surprise to find our family friend there. So, and I don't know if you remember when he was creative director there or
Before me.
yeah, before you. I'm thinking, you know, maybe it was like mid-'80s or something like that.
I don't have a good timeline in my days.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was hired as a creative director, and so I worked under him. It became obvious when he was a creative director that he wasn't an art director. I mean, he knew art, his dad was an artist, he could organize, okay. But as far as assigning the jobs and scheduling, I said we really need an art director who's doing that under him, so I did that. And then when he left, I mean, me, the creative director, because I'd already kind of been doing that. Yeah. He's now, I think, handling his dad's
Yes.
artwork.
Yeah.
So makes it simple. There was another question. Yes.
So, may I have permission to ask Rita a question? Because Rita, you were there when I was a very clueless co-op student in my late teens. And you and Isabel Newman and Judy Cordell were this power trio, and I don't think I ever in my cluelessness really understood what the three of you did. Do you mind sharing?
She did a lot of different things.
I
Where do you want to
know,
start?
I know.
Well, Judy was a supervisor, so was Isabel.
Stand up, please.
Judy was a supervisor, Isabel was a supervisor, and I was just a peon. I just followed suit. Isabel brought me into Antioch and said, hey, we need somebody like you, because, you know, I'm always into something. She said, let's get you off the street, let's get you. So I said, okay, let's do this. So once they got me in there, it was like, oh, this is nice. But then they started me out with these little sponges and in a cap, and take book plates and put them in sample books so that they could go out. And the salespeople went out, you know, they take these little sample books and says, this is what we do here. So, and after a while, it's like, this is not for me. So I get in some kind of trouble there, and then Isabel said, well, let's try you over here. So I got over there, I started breaking out bookmarks from big sheets of coming off the press. Got bored of doing that. They had to keep me busy. Some way, somehow I had to stay busy. And Judy would always say, Rita, you gotta sit still over here and do this and everything. So that's how a lot of that came about. But I was fortunate because I was able to move around the whole company, from doing production art, printing, embossing, what else?
I know you
Hot
did printing
stamping.
on book plates when they were
Yeah,
special
and I did
orders.
special order printing on book plates. Matter of fact, I was telling Jean earlier that when we did Star Wars, we had to do a special cover for them. And they had to have gold leaf imprint number 1, number 2, 001, 002, you know. And they would take those, and there was only like, I think, 6 of them that we had to do. And so at that time, I was doing the covers on all the journals and things. So they sent in and said, we got to make sure we get this right, you know. So I said, okay. And I was embossing the numbers on there. Well, on the very first one, what I did, this is a secret, so don't let it get out of here. Because she just found out about it. On the very first book, what I did is I put my name on the spine of that book. So now that book is somewhere where Star Wars with my name on the spine.
That's like on the
It's on the
inside
inside of the book. It's
spine.
on the inside of the spine. It has my name, Rita Hamilton, on that. So in case anybody says, hey, I know who's got their name on this thing. But those are little tricks I used to do because my mind always was doing tricks on me. So that's pretty much how it was with me.
But when you moved to production art and got computers, you really picked that up
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah.
That was her place. She was a
That's where I wanted
computer
to be.
person.
Yeah, I wanted to be right there and did a lot of the work there. And then I went to, I kind of retired from that area pretty much.
So because everything went digital.
Everything went digital, and then I was getting ready to retire, and then I retired out of where we went to Fairborn. Went to Fairborn, and remember we had a
Some page a day calendars?
yeah, page a day or something like that, and then I retired shortly after that.
Good
Yeah,
stories.
the company actually didn't mention,
They
we
did.
had Antioch in the UK.
Yeah,
I went one time, you know, some of their stuff would be a little bit different. There was Antioch in Canada. We had to kind of do that because all the pricing and all the dates in the calendars and all that kind of stuff is different,
that
so.
was interesting.
Yeah, it's Canada. And then we bought companies.
Right.
We got the page a day, I think Ann Harris did, she go there?
Ann Harris did.
Worked at the page a day in Fairborn, which was the kind that you see, is it sure? This one they made there,
Yeah.
right?
That's it.
I don't know, look like that, but, yeah. And largely literary, way back there, there's a box. There are also gift sets, there were mugs and t-shirts, and we used art for a few other things. We bought that line from some other company. So. Yeah, there were some other questions somebody had.
Hi. I might have missed it because I was late, but did y'all guys, I remember that everything when we were not kids, younger, but not grown, everything said made in Yellow Springs, Ohio. Is that true? So,
It was
and it
originally.
shipped globally or nationally? Could you talk a little about that, please?
It was originally, until, when we got Webway, there would have been their products that they were manufacturing in St. Cloud. And then they added a place in Sparks and Virginia. It wasn't until, late 1990s sometime when we wanted to add the wired journals. We were making the book bound ones, you know, it's like book, but when you want to have the wire, we couldn't do that in Yellow Springs. And that's when they searched for where we could do it, and they were getting it from China.
So it was
Before that,
made in
it was Yellow
USA
Springs.
or made in, I mean, I've seen made in USA, of course we see made in China all the time, but I think I literally remember that all the stuff that we bought, like if we bought things that said from the bookshelf of, and then my mom would get those so that each of us kids could have a from the bookshelf of thing. And it would say on the box, that's the gold box. We used to have lots of those.
Yeah.
It would say made in Yellow Springs
It does.
rather than made in America or made in
Right here.
China. And it said
Antioch
made in
Bookplate
Yellow
Company,
Springs.
Yellow
I wonder if
Springs.
that was true, if it was my imagination.
No, it's
Okay,
on.
thanks.
And then they packaged, after a while, they had packages, which I didn't have one. Instead of always being in a box, you could get less in like a clamshell package. But we still did those. You're right. Anybody else?
A, B, logo.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Got a question now? You can still ask questions, walk around, be here, or,
Gene,
oh, wow.
did you want, am I the only artist here?
Freelance
else?
artists? Yes.
Oh,
How can whoever worked at a book plate stand up? Or any of them?
Just a few thousand. It lasts us 3 months. You never know, then we'd be too busy, we need to hire somebody. Can I hire them? Yeah.
Did you get fans for free then?
Do you want me to say anything about art?
They're just.
If you want to, I can't stop you.
Well, my name's Lance Ridiger. I was one of the main freelance illustrators. She was my boss. Anyway, long story short is, sometimes you had complete freedom. I had complete freedom on this piece. And do you have the Nerds book by chance?
I did not bring the nerds.
Anyway, the Nerds book, I wanted to present.
Do you remember Nerds?
Yeah,
Candy?
Nerds Candy.
No.
Well, they're still in existence. I had to do a book about nerds doing something related to kids. And so I did one, different theories of swimming and playing tennis or whatever. But the one thing that made me a little upset is I put a nerd on a skateboard like this. They didn't like that. I had to change that art and change it. Nerds can't do that with their feet. I said, that's how you skate on a skateboard. So I had to change it to this. And that's just one of the things that I relate to. This, I was given this. This is another artist, and they asked me if I could redo, or because they couldn't get him to do the book, they wanted somebody who could do his style, and that's how I got this particular job. So there's the relationship to that. Any of the wildlife I seem to have a lot more control with. I'm killing also. But when it came to licensed material, that's when the artist was under constraints to do exactly as they dictated.
Right, I included over on the licensing table, there would be a style book usually that a licensor would provide. And the example of the nerds, nobody wanted to work on nerds, it's like, here's a job nobody wants, you can have it. Yeah, so there's a style book, and they would usually send something like this that would give you lots of specifications. This is the real Ghostbusters. So after the original movies with the people and everything, they did the cartoon series, which they're still doing cartoon series. These are some of the slides that they sent of when they were making the movies with the people ones. So we would pick out images for the books that, like these have, pretty sure, yeah, actual images from the movies. Whereas later when they did the cartoon series is when we did the real Ghostbusters. And somebody in the department did do these pages. Someplace.
Does it say the artist?
I had some art, but it's gotten lost somewhere. Maybe it's just in
in the
here.
book, doesn't it say
Who did it?
Joan, me?
If it's licensed, it might not have. No. Peter Mandel adopted the story. He was a writer. We had 2 or 3 different people who at different times wrote our books. Jill Wolfe was the longest hanger-inner, who wrote many of the things that we, like the children's books. Sometimes they beat her ideas. Very often, though, she'd be told, write a version of, the Christmas Story or whatever. And she also proofread everything, so she was really good at proofreading. She used to work for a newspaper. Someplace I had the original art for these, but I've lost it. So anyway, licensings were definitely always the hardest to deal with.
So most of what you were working with was partially developed to the models that they then developed into full art? Is that, or was it just they gave you an idea and you developed the image yourself?
Well, that had to do with, since I had a close relationship with the art director, we knew exactly what I could do and what they wanted. So when I came up with something that didn't fit what the particular licensed people would want, you would say, hey, you can't do that because they want this, blah, blah, blah. And I can manage to do it over. So,
Well, these were things that we developed. They
Yeah.
weren't licensed, so
Right.
didn't have that problem. But several people did do, for instance, the flavor bears. They're the ones that they had scented stickers, weren't they? Scratch and sniff stickers on them. And the sticker pages did too. That one's missing. That was in their kids. They were little, I took some part. So they had stickers in them too. There was no smells on the stickers.
no.
In the book. So we had a series of these books that Jill wrote different stories. So sometimes some of the pages we both did, one of the books you did mostly, there was a book that one of the other artists did. They just had to look a little bit like.
Yeah, you
So I'm
can't.
not really sure about your question, what exactly you were asking in terms of the.
Well, I'm just trying to figure the process out. So there's quite a bit of lag between holding a pencil in your hand and camera-ready art.
Right.
And the process of that is creative, but it's also seems to be fairly along the craft line. So staying within what the production people want in their line of thinking.
We did, the closest department would have been the stripping department, who stripped in the colors. And they originally, before everything was digital. And I think there's an artboard or two where you would see where they had to do that. And you would have had to do it in a way that then that department would have been able to take one of these and shoot it and know that this is a certain color. And this is a certain color. So they made films that way. Well, the next year or so, a couple years later, he painted the whole thing. So this is Tom Tales. Although I did find out he didn't originate the patrol. It's one of the original bookplates by somebody else. He picked up the troll and it became his character. And then we would send it out to a color separator in an outside house. And they would provide you what was called a chroma, which was a color proof. If the color looked okay, then they sent the film. If it didn't look okay, they'd go back and tweak it until we were happy with it. And then we'd turn over that film and that proof. And if it needed an artboard, like a lot of these, you would have type or something that they needed to add on. They would have needed to add the title and stuff like that. And then the stripping department would put that all together and then end up making the plates for the press. That's a little more of the process.
Okay, so once they signed the contract, it just depended on how complex
Oh, on the
final
license.
result it was before you actually started printing.
On the license, it would have had to, go back and forth for their approval, for sure, yeah. If we did any art, like he said, definitely, before you separated or did anything, if you wrote anything, they have to prove the copy. Even when they sent a style book and you followed it, you might not be perfect enough. Sometimes they had art that they provided. For instance, a lot of these, they would have had slides or something from the movie that we could then pick up and put the design together and show them what all our designs were and get approval first. And I'm pretty sure after they were printed, we even had to send samples for approval before they were okay to sell. Answer? Yeah.
Did you have a studio there where the artists would sit in your building and do your work, or like Since Lance was freelance, he could do some of it at home, or?
Yeah, we would work at home.
I work from, I taught at the University of Dayton, so I would teach in the daytime, 3 days in which I taught 2 days in which I was off. I would do artwork on those 2 days that I was off, and a lot of the times I was up till 4 in the morning. She said, yeah, it has to be on my desk by tomorrow morning. And I'd go, okay, me. So I'd work till about 4 in the morning until I got it finished. Sometimes I'd wake her up and say, is it done? Like that. And I'd go to bed.
We all worked in-house, yes. Like I mentioned, I had to work first in a trailer because there wasn't room for me, but they had tables out in one area of the building. And then they added on this room, the backside of that older part of the building. And we all fit in there.
So could they just dress in jeans or casually, or if they have to
It
dress?
was
up?
pretty casual, yeah.
I was just wondering, because back in those days, I don't know how long ago, we had to actually dress up to go to downtown Dayton or whatever, but.
We only dressed up for the shows.
Yeah.
We only dressed up for the trade shows.
Yeah, you're meeting with a customer
Yeah.
or going to a trade show.
But for just
working.
producing work.
In fact, when my older son was born, we lived at the corner of High and Dayton Street. And I would go back to work, you know how these walls are. I had to go back to work and I would split my lunch hour into 2 half hours to go home and feed him. But it was right up the street, so I could do it. And they were pretty good about, special arrangements. Usually, unless you got one particular person in there who's a stickler, which every now and then we would get.
So they didn't have to come in and punch a time clock or?
Well, you did, yeah.
You did?
You still punched the time clock. So any other questions right now? Or you want to look around? And she's got some. Yeah.
I was just going to bring up these beaded bookmarks were done by what we call home vendors, and we would send out thousands of them at a time, and somebody would sit at home and put these tassels and beads on. So these weren't done by a machine. These were done by people in their homes, and a lot of times they were retired people or people that had little kids at home that wanted to be at home with their children. So, but for the production office, it was a bit of a nightmare because we would send out all like 50 pounds of beads to these people, and coming and going, and I don't know how many we had at one time, but they called them home vendors. And the home vendors, I'd say we probably had 200 to 300 different home vendors that would bring stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And
they
that
would come
was that
in.
kind of after we used the workshops, because she worked with the workshops that did it. But at some point, we couldn't do that anymore. I forget why. We couldn't work with the outside,
Yeah.
what do you call the place where you
The
worked?
work centers.
The work centers. We had to get the home vendors. And they worked a lot with stickers for printmakers too.
Yeah. And they'd come in their cars would be so heavy in the back from all those beads. A box of those beads would probably weigh 50, 60 pounds, and they'd take like 10 boxes at a time, so you'd see them going out of the parking lot. Their cars weighted down like that, so.
Yeah, we have a lot of stories. So, we used to be a dentist right across the street, and I could run over for my dental appointment. It's really easy.
I just live right across the street, no more separate.
There you go. So that was convenient. And so different from Yellow Springs today, I think. I think it was just.
So, Chief, do you want to let everybody know the sequence and what's on each of the tables?
Sure. We a lot of you looked before, but even so, we can move the chairs if you want, if that makes more sense. Start with the history, which I said, I don't know any more than anybody else about that. I wasn't around. So the first table is some photos that we ran across, a lot of people who worked a long time ago there, and the 2 buildings downtown. I didn't really have a building with a picture of the building now, but you can go look at that every time you leave town. And then the second one is more about book plates. Focus focusing a little more on older ones because a lot of these things became pretty much flat business. You know, you can only put so many bookmarks and bookplates in stores. It's kind of hard to build without adding a lot of different things. But we still would keep these lines. And then bookmarks and all the different kinds we made. And if you, they even kept adding more. And if you see one of the 2005 catalog over there, there's even more interesting kinds of bookmarks they kept adding. We put this one, we ran across this one. It's one of the die cuts for a shape mark that would cut it into the shape. Not the one that's sitting here, but a different one. So bookmarks and then calendars, books, and design themes. Very often we reused art, and this is examples of how we did that, things that we might have developed for one product. And you could find plenty of other places you could use that same art. So, for instance, as an example, this is a header that would go on the top of the display if they had, for instance, maybe all of these bookmarks or something, or other products. And then I just put a few. I tended to keep a few samples of almost most of the licenses we did, just because, I don't know, they're interesting. It's something we worked with a lot with the vendor, with the licensor. I have a list which might have left a few things off, but I didn't put examples of everything on the list because there were too many. There were ones I forgot about. I was like, we did that? Did I work on that? Because we did have a lot. There's a few Garfields, which were, of course, one of the first. I know Joan did these beautiful Sesame Street bookmarks. We weren't supposed to put our names on things because we worked in-house. Every now and then you'll find something with somebody's name, but you really weren't supposed to. And then later on, there just seemed to be so many other things that existed that came later, many of them from China. We did the, like she mentioned, the limited edition. We did a few different things, limited edition. See, there's a number stamped on the back. This is number 3, which I have, but her number 1, she would have written. And then we made these collector sets inside. It's got a journal, it's got some bookmarks, and I didn't open it since it's valuable someday. Lord of the Rings, we had an artist who still does a lot of art in another area of Ohio. She licenses her art now. Amelia Sowash, and she did a lot of the art for Lord of the Rings, for Harry Potter. You can tell, you know, this might have been an image from one of the book covers or from one of the books, but she would have done all this other stuff, and she was really good at Photoshop to do all these things. And, so that's a different tapes. I found this book and threw it in. We tried greeting cards. It's a really hard market to break into. There are a few different lines. One of the other artists who worked there did that one. Joan did this line.